The professor said that the problem is less well understood from an ideological angle than from a pragmatic one. I would respectfully suggest that this is just the reason why the United States of America, over several successive administrations, has had so much trouble dealing with Iran and with the Middle East in general, because they don't understand neither Carter, nor Reagan, nor Bush, nor Clinton, nor Bush, don't manifest any understanding of the ideologies that underlie all the various events that have taken place leading up to and following the establishment of the Islamic Republic in Iran. For example, the professor made reference to the fact that the United States is allied with Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Egypt, and said, therefore, it's not this problem, it's this conflict, it's not about ideology. Actually, I would suggest that those alliances themselves are evidence of the short-sightedness and wrong-headedness of the Bush administration, as well as the previous administrations about this issue. Neither Democrat nor Republican has this problem understood correctly. There, of course, are a variety of reasons for all three alliances, having to do primarily with oil, with Saudi Arabia, with bribing Egypt not to attack Israel, and with propping up Musharraf in Pakistan because the alternatives would be worse. But at the same time, these three countries are the primary incubators of this particular ideology of Islamic supremacism that is threatening the United States and the world today. And so to enter into, to continue and maintain alliances with these countries without adequately addressing the fact that we are, with our own dollars, aiding in the spread of a virulently anti-American and violent ideology is short-sighted and naive, to say the least. Ideology is absolutely at the core of this conflict. We were discussing earlier about what Mahmoud Ahmadinejad would do if he gets a bomb, and we agreed that probably the first thing he would do would be to send it over to Tel Aviv. Why? Israel is not actually threatening Iran, and could not possibly threaten Iran. The reason why he targets Israel, the reasons why, are rooted in his religious conception of the world. And so that conception has to be understood and addressed, or the problem will not be properly addressed. Also, the professor's analysis, as is indicative of probably all the mainstream analyses coming out of Washington, conflates ideological foes and assumes that they will all behave in the same way. So that analyses that are originally devised against communist regimes are assumed will work against Islamic regimes, when actually communism and Islamic supremacism are not at all the same thing. And while the United States was able to achieve a coexistence, an uneasy coexistence to be sure, but a coexistence with the Soviet Union for many decades on the basis of mutually assured destruction, the idea that a nuclear attack would be responded to with a nuclear attack, and thus neither of us wanted to see our own selves destroyed, so we wouldn't do it, that doesn't really work with a regime where you actually have one of the spokesmen having said in recent years that we can sustain a few million deaths, 5, 10 million deaths. No problem. Because the chaos, the suffering in the world that has to come is the necessary prelude for the coming of the Imam Mahdi, the 12th Imam, who returns to Islamize the world in Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's conception and that of the mullahs who he represents. And so he doesn't mind bringing about that chaos. Mutually assured destruction means nothing to him or to the mullahs. So these kinds of things are just some small indications of why what we need now is a different analysis, a new analysis. And what we're being subjected to again and again are the same tired analyses based on outmoded categories and ways of thinking that were devised for the last war. We're in a new one now, and we have to have some people with the courage to devise some new ways of thinking to deal with it.
How far you take this emphasis on ideology in terms of not just Iran, but prior actions in Iraq, and other analysts Because one strand, I think, on this panel here is the belief in freedom, in free markets, and sovereignty of people and nations in general. And I want to take you to, I mentioned before Milton Friedman, the Nobel laureate in economics at the University of Chicago. I'm sure people are familiar with him. Passed away last November. But in a sense, Milton Friedman wrote the book on freedom, Capitalism and Freedom. And half a year or so before he passed away, he was interviewed and said it was wrong for the United States to go into Iraq because it was aggression. This comes from one of the foremost free market economists in the last century. And so, does Friedman have the wrong idea? I know he's an economist, he's not a foreign policy specialist, but does he too have the wrong idea of not understanding the religious fervor? And of course, Iraq is quite different than Iran in terms of religion.
Yeah, Iraq is quite different, but
does that still say apply? Would you say Friedman was wrong?
No, I say Friedman was absolutely right. See, one of the things I thought was, well, I got a kick out of it, really. You know that I am a representative of the David Harwood Freedom Center, which sponsors the Terrorism Awareness Week, as it's called here, Islamo-fascism Awareness Week, as it's called in campuses around the country. And we've been getting quite a lot of reaction from campus leftist groups and Islamic groups, and invariably they say that what we're trying to do is justify the war in Iraq. And I was very tickled to see myself personally named as one of the architects of the invasion of Iraq. I was very pleased to see that because actually I published an article before there were any troops in Iraq saying it was a bad idea and that we shouldn't do it. And I'm not in favor of it. I'm sorry. I respect the President of the United States in his stand against terrorism in general, and I think that he represents a strength of response that is worthy of respect, but that it has not been fully informed by a full understanding of the ideology. Here again, what he did not realize in 2003, and I don't think he or Secretary Rice realizes at this time, is the political nature and the inherent political nature of Islam as it's understood by both Sunnis and Shia in Iraq, such that there are very strong forces there who will not accept a regime that is based on the idea of laws formulated by human consensus, because they believe Islamic Sharia law to be the absolute law of God that's not to be questioned, and Muslims must work to implement it. Now, they obviously, the varying groups have different ways of understanding that, and different, there are various factions that are competing in getting to be the ones who do implement it, but they do agree on the idea that it is certainly preferable in all respects to a law that is arrived at by voting and so on. And the Iraqi constitution, of course, already, the new Iraqi constitution, says that Islamic law is the highest law of the land, and no law can be made that contradicts the laws of Islam. This is a principle that ultimately, because it will deny equality of rights to women and to religious minorities, militates against the Western idea of democracy in ways that I think have been improperly understood in Washington. Now, all that said, does that mean that I'm in favor of, as it's called, cutting and running and so on, and unilateral withdrawal from Iraq? Obviously not. I think that would hand the Mujahideen a great victory, and they understand that it would at this point. And so here again, I'm the advocate of a third way, a different way. What I do believe very strongly is what I was saying before, is that we need new ways of thinking in this. Neither party is on board here. Neither party really understands. We need to do something very much like we did in the Cold War with Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, The Voice of America. We were hearing about how in Iran they were so hardened by Bollinger standing up to Ahmadinejad. Well, you know, in the Cold War, the United States actually beamed into the Iron Curtain, behind the Iron Curtain, programming that taught forthrightly, that stated without apology that the American way of life was superior, that the idea of equality of rights of all people before the law, these things were principles that were superior to the communist system. And they gave great heart, they gave great hope to the people who were suffering under the communist regimes. Nowadays, we're not fighting the ideological battle at all. We are not recognizing in the first place the elements of the universally accepted principles of human rights that I referred to in my law that are being threatened by the ideology of Islamic supremacism, and we are not combating them in any way. So I think that what we need is a reconfiguration of our forces, a reconfiguration of our alliances, and a very strong, hard look at the ideological component of this struggle. And so ultimately, you asked me about Milton Friedman and his idea that the war in Iraq was a bad idea. I would agree with it. We probably wouldn't agree on why that's so or what's to be done about it, but on that we agree.
Let me give Professor Hibbert a chance to respond.